The house on Elm Street has been in our family for nearly 80 years. My late husband Fletcher used to tell me how his grandfather bought the land just before the Great Depression, back when Waco was still growing into itself. That two-story house with its wraparound porch, tall ceilings, and the floorboards that creak like they're whispering stories, held every memory that ever mattered. Was in that house we raised our only son, Carmen. We filled the rooms with laughter during Christmas dinners and shared quiet moments watching the seasons pass. It's where Fletcher died, too peacefully in his sleep, 5 years ago, leaving me alone with the memories stitched into every wall. I'm Gwendolyn Hitch. I'm 68, a retired elementary school teacher. I spent 4 decades shaping young minds in this town. These days, many of my former students stop to chat with me at the grocery store, sometimes with their own children by their side. It warms something deep in me, makes me feel like I mattered. Not a big place. Everyone knows everyone. I cherish my morning walks passing Mrs. Clark tending to her roses, Mr. Donnelly and his elderly dachshund, and the Lorenzo family waving from their bakery. Familiar faces in a familiar world. Small but comforting. When Fletcher passed, I had to learn to live alone. The first year was brutal. I'd reach across the bed in the night, only to find cold sheets. I kept cooking for 2. I'd sit at the kitchen table and talk out loud to the empty chair, pretending he was still listening. But time did what it always does, it softened the edges of the pain. I found a rhythm. I gardened, read, joined a book club. I wasn't happy, not quite. But I was at peace. The only thing that unsettled me was my relationship with Carmen. He was always strong-willed, stubborn, really. But it helped him. He climbed fast in his job at a construction company, eventually becoming a foreman. Fletcher and I were so proud. But when he married Mercy, everything changed. Mercy Wilmont was bold and flashy, a whirlwind from Tulsa who lit up every room she walked into, but not in a way I trusted. She worked at a local salon and dreamed of owning her own. She had this smile that never reached her eyes. From the moment we met, she called me Gwenny, a name that grated every time she said it. "You're so authentic," she told me once, "but a little makeup and a modern haircut could do wonders, even at your age." I forced a smile. I had lived long enough to know who I was. I didn't need fixing. Mercy didn't just critique me, she critiqued everything. My old furniture, my framed photos. She'd wander through my home like it was a thrift store and say, "This place is a gold mine. The location, the space. If you sold it and invested right, the family could really benefit." I saw the hunger in her eyes. After the wedding, Carmen and Mercy came by less often. He always had an excuse: work, renovations, weekend trips. When they did visit, Mercy made sure to find something wrong. "That hairstyle ages you, Gwenny," she'd say, laughing. "If I had my own salon, I could transform you." Carmen would chuckle. "Leave Mom alone. She's old school." Old school. Like I was obsolete. What they didn't see was that I had spent a lifetime adapting, teaching new curriculums, learning new tech, even mastering smartphones and social media, when most of my friends didn't bother. After Fletcher died, our connection frayed further. Carmen still called once a week, but the conversations were short and shallow. Over time, I began to notice the way he looked at the house, appraising it, like Mercy did. One day he casually suggested, "Maybe you should consider a smaller apartment or a nursing home." "I'm 68, not 98, I snapped. "And I'm managing just fine." He dropped it, but their tone shifted after that. More visits, more concern. Mercy even offered to help around the house. "You've got so much clutter," she said once, opening drawers and closets. "You ever think of a garage sale?" Clear out the extras. Extras to her meant photo albums. Antique cups Fletcher collected. The books I'd gathered over a lifetime. One evening, as they were leaving, Carmine looked back and said, "By the way, Mom, maybe you should sign over power of attorney, just in case something happens. You know, bills and medical stuff." "There's nothing wrong with me," I replied firmly. He didn't argue, but I saw their expressions shift cold and calculated. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Saturday, the doorbell rang. A young man in a courier uniform handed me a registered letter. Inside was a legal notice. My own son was petitioning the court to declare me mentally incompetent. He wanted full guardianship, the right to control all my affairs including selling. My hands trembled. I read the document 3 times. Dementia? Me? The woman who still did crossword puzzles, who ran book clubs, who remembered every birthday of every student she ever taught. They accused me of forgetfulness, of confusion. They had been preparing this, watching, taking notes. I sat in the kitchen, stunned. My world, my son, had turned against me. And then something inside me snapped. The grief turned into fire. How dare they? All those questions, the forced concern, the sudden interest in my health. It had all been part of a plan. They wanted the house. For Mercy's dream salon, no doubt. A gold mine, she'd called it. I wiped away my tears. No. I wouldn't go down quietly. Fletcher used to say I had a fighter in me. Now it was time to prove it. I picked up the phone and called my oldest friend. "Doris," I said. "It's Gwen. I need your help. I need your help. I think I'm in big trouble." Doris Mulligan was always a reliable person. I met her 30 years ago when her oldest son was in the 1st grade where I taught. Unlike many other parents, Doris always made a time to be involved in her son's school life, despite her employment at the bank. We bonded at school events and later became family friends. Fletcher loved to play chess with her husband Tobias while Doris and I discussed books and school gossip. Now, years later, our friendship has only grown stronger. After Fletcher died, Doris was there for me, helping me cope with my grief and loneliness. She stopped by every weekend with homemade baked goods, dragged me out for walks when I was ready, to sit at home for days on end, immersed in memories. I knew I could trust her with anything. And yet, when I called her that Saturday morning, my voice shook with humiliation and pain. Telling someone, even your best friend, that your own son thought you were a senile old woman was unbearable. Embarrassed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Doris said, listening to Mirambling's story. "Don't do anything, just wait for me." She arrived even earlier than promised. She was a short, energetic woman with a short salt and pepper haircut and shrewd brown eyes. Was the manager of a local bank branch and knew all about finances, loans, and other money matters I'd never understood. "Show me the papers," she demanded as soon as I stepped through the door. I handed her the court notice. Doris scrutinized every line, the wrinkle between her eyebrows growing deeper. "It's outrageous," she said at last. "An outright lie. Anyone who's talked to you for 5 minutes would know you're of sound mind." "But why is Carmine doing this?" I asked, tears welling up in my throat again. Was the house really that important? Doris sighed and took my hand. "Gwen, I didn't want to tell you, but I think you should know now. Your son has been at the bank a lot lately. He's having money troubles." "What kind of problems?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "He seems to be making good money at the construction company." "He does, but he spends a lot, especially his wife. I've seen their credit history. It's not very good. They took out a loan to buy a house 2 years ago. then another one for renovations, then a new car for Mercy. I listened and couldn't believe it. Harmon had always been frugal. Fletcher had taught him to value every dollar to save for a rainy day. Had Mercy changed him like that? And now, Doris continued, they tried to get a business loan, but were turned down because of the debts they already had. A business loan? I remembered Mercy always talking about her own salon. Yeah, to open a beauty salon. Mercy Magic. That's what it's supposed to be called. Your daughter-in-law came in with a business plan. An ambitious one, I might add. An upscale full of a salon from haircuts to spa treatments. I shook me head. Everything was coming together. The bank had turned down their loan. And now they'd found another way to get the money. My house. What should I do, Doris? The first thing to do is hire a good lawyer. I know one, not the most expensive, but very experienced, Hammond Peak. He specializes in just this sort of thing. I nodded, pulling out my notebook to write down the name. Also, Doris lowered her voice as if someone might overhear us. I'd check out your daughter-in-law's background if I were you. She came from Tulsa, right? What did she do there? Where did her experience in the salon business come from? You think there's something fishy going on? I don't know, Doris answered. Honestly. But something tells me it's worth digging a little deeper. You know, Tobias has a friend who's a private investigator. A private investigator? He used to work for the police, retired now. But sometimes he takes private investigations. Field Ray. I could get his contacts. I bit my lip in hesitation. Private detective? It sounded like something out of a detective novel. But on the other hand, if Carmen and Mercy were going to play dirty, maybe I should have used every means at my disposal. Okay, I finally decided. Find out, please. Doris smiled and squeezed my hand. It's the right thing to do, Gwen. We're not going to let them take the house away from you. Not after everything you've been through. Monday morning, I was already sitting in a Hammond Peck's modest office. His reception area was small with shabby furniture and old-fashioned blinds on the windows, but the lawyer himself impressed me. He was a tall man in his 50s with shrewd blue eyes and a calm, confident way of speaking. Mrs. Hitch, he said after reviewing the documents, these cases are unfortunately not uncommon. Children who want to gain control of their parents' estates often use allegations of incapacity. But don't worry, we have a time to prepare. What do we need to do? I asked, relieved by his reassurance. First, we will organize an independent medical examination. We need a specialist's opinion that you are fully capable. Secondly, we'll collect testimonies from people who regularly communicate with you, neighbors, friends, former colleagues. Thirdly, we'll prepare documents to prove that you manage your household independently and successfully, pay your bills, and take care of your health. I nodded, making notes. The plan seemed reasonable. What about? I hesitated, not sure how to phrase it. An investigation. We suspect that my daughter-in-law may have a questionable past. Hammond tapped his fingers on the table, thoughtfully docked in these cases. Any information can be useful. If you want to hire a private investigator, I don't mind. But note that it won't have any direct bearing on your competency case. I understand that, but I think it's important to know who I'm dealing with. In that case, go ahead. Just be careful not to do anything that could be construed as harassment or invasion of privacy. No illegal methods. I assured him that I would act within the law, and we arranged to meet again in a week. As soon as I left the lawyer's office, I called Doris. Do you have that detective's contacts? Yes. Write it down. Doris dictated the number to me. Tobias has already talked to him. He's ready to meet you. Theobald Ray lived on the outskirts of Waco, in a small one-story house surrounded by a neat garden. When I drove up to his house that afternoon, He was working in the garden trimming the hedges. He was a short, stocky man with a tanned, wrinkled face and attentive eyes. He looked to be in his 60s, Mrs. Hitch. He set aside the garden shears and wiped his hands on his jeans. Tobias told me you were coming. Come on in the house and we'll talk. Inside the house was as neat as the garden. Simple, functional furniture. No unnecessary decorations. On the walls were a few pictures, apparently family photos. In the corner of the living room was a computer desk with a modern laptop, the only sign that the owner of the house was not completely behind the times. So Field said as we sat down at the kitchen table with cups of coffee. Tobias has summarized the situation. Your son wants to take the house from you using an incapacity suit, and you suspect that his wife may have some skeletons in the closet. I nodded, feeling a little awkward. It all seemed so wrong. Hiring a detective to dig into me own daughter-in-law's past. But what else was I supposed to do? Mercy Wilmot, now Hitch, I said. She came from Tulsa about 3 years ago. Worked at a beauty parlor called Curls and Lacquer on Main Street. Always talked about how she had a lot of experience in the salon business. And a dream of starting her own business. Theobald was making notes in Asmore notebook. What exactly do you want to know? Anything that might help me understand why they're so desperate to get my house. If there's anything in her past that might be useful for a defense in court. The detective nodded. I got it. I'll start with a background check on her in Tulsa. See if she worked in beauty parlors there. If she had any legal problems, debts, lawsuits. Standard procedure. How long will it take? Depends on what I find. I could have initial results in a few days. Or more in-depth investigation a week, maybe 2. I sighed. The court hearing was scheduled in 3 weeks. Time Washert. Do what you can, Mr. Ray. I'll pay the rush fee. Theobald, please. Hesnod for the first time since our conversation began. And don't worry about the extra fee. I like cases like this where there's an opportunity for justice. The next days passed in feverish preparation for the trial. I underwent a medical examination by a neurologist recommended by Hammond. The doctor confirmed that I had no signs of dementia or other cognitive impairment. I gathered letters of support from neighbors, former co-workers, even the principal of the school where I had worked for almost 40 years. Doris helped gather all the financial documents to prove that I pay my bills, property taxes, and insurance. All this time, I hadn't heard a word from Carmen. He didn't call. He didn't visit. It was as if by filing a lawsuit, he'd decided to keep me out of his life completely until the court decided. That silence hurt more than the lawsuit itself. Did money mean more to him than our relationship? Or had Mercy insisted on this behavior? I didn't know what to think, and that ignorance made my heart ache. The 5th day after we met, Theobald called. Mrs. Hitch, I have the first results. I think you should come down and take a look. I went to see him right away. Theobald met on the doorstep with a serious expression. Come in, he said, ushering me into the living room where a laptop computer and a stack of printed documents were spread out on a table. I managed to find something interesting about your daughter-in-law. I sat down on the couch feeling my heart pounding. What was it? First of all, Mercy Wilmot isn't really Mercy Wilmot. Her real name is Mercedes Wilson. She changed her name 6 months before she moved to Waco. Why? I asked, surprised by this information. Probably to get a fresh start. Theobald turned the laptop screen toward me. Because she didn't have the best reputation in Tulsa. The screen opened to an article from the local Tulsan's paper from 2 years ago. The headline read, Beauty Crown Beauty Salon close after scandal over unpaid wages. Crown of Beauty. I leaned closer so I could see the text better. She owned the salon. Yes. Theobald nodded. She'd opened it year before this article. From the advertising, it was a full-service luxury salon. Mercedes Wilson. There's a picture of her in the article. It's definitely your daughter-in-law. Promised clients and staff royal service. I looked at the article. It said the salon closed suddenly, leaving employees without a paycheck for the past 2 months. Clients who had paid in advance for subscriptions were also left with nothing. The owner of the salon disappeared without giving a reason for the closure. That's not all, Theobald commented, opening another tab on his browser. I found several complaints to the Better Business Bureau from former employees and customers of Crown Beauty. They claim Mercedes Wilson used fake accounts, overpriced cosmetics, and promised employees shares in the business that never materialized. I stared at the screen, feeling anger building up inside. It was the same pattern as now. Promises of golden mountains, ambitious plans, finding money for the great dream. Were there any lawsuits? I asked, remembering the lawyer's words about the importance of legal evidence. A few small lawsuits from employees demanding payment of wagers. Theobald replied, showing me printouts of court documents, but most of them were unsuccessful because the company was declared bankrupt, and Mercedes had already disappeared from the city. And 6 months later, she showed up here in Waco with a new name, and no mention of her failed business. I shook my head, stunned by the extent of the deception. That's right, Theobald nodded. I'm still looking. I want to find some former employees who can give me more information, maybe even testimony if it comes to that. Thank you, Theobald, I said sincerely. It changes everything. Don't thank me ahead of time. He smiled slightly. I've only just begun to dig. Who knows what else we'll find. I left the detective's office with a heavy heart, but also with the feeling that I was finally getting some control over the situation. Now I knew who I was dealing with. Mercia Mercedes wasn't just an ambitious woman with dreams of owning her own business. She was a con artist willing to use people to achieve her goals. And right now it seems her goal was my house and my own son was the means to that end. 3 days after our meeting, Theobald called again. His voice sounded agitated, which was unusual for this normally unruffled man. Mrs. Hitch, I found 2 former employees of Crown of Beauty. They've agreed to talk to us. Us? I asked, not expecting to have to meet these people in person. Yes, I think you should be present for the conversation. They want to know why we need information about Mercedes. They trust me, but they want to make sure we're not working for her. I agreed, even though the prospect of driving to Tulsa didn't make me happy. It was a 3-hour drive, and it had been a long time since I traveled that far alone. But Theobald offered to drive me, and I gratefully accepted. We left early the next morning. Theobald was a silent companion, which suited me just fine. I stared out the window at the fields and forests passing by, thinking about how strangely my life had turned. A week ago, I was just an old widow living a quiet life in my house. Now I'm traveling to another city to meet people who might help me expose a fraudulent daughter-in-law. Tell me about them, I asked Theobald when we were halfway to Tulsa. Audrey Voorhees, 32, was a senior stylist at Crown of Beauty. She had worked at several other salons in Tulsa before and had a good reputation in professional circles. Finley Taft, 27 years old cosmetologist, specialized in spa treatments and skincare. Both had worked at the salon since it opened, and both suffered when it closed. Suffered in what way? Financially and reputationally. Mercedes convinced them to leave their previous jobs with the promise of high salaries and shares in the business. When the dealership closed, they were left without 2 months' paychecks. What's more, Finley took out a loan to invest in the salon. Mercedes convinced him it was a great investment. He'd lost that money too. I shook my head. struggling to contain my anger. How many lives had that woman ruined with her machinations, and now she was targeting my house, using my son as a tool. What about her reputation? I asked, remembering Theobald's words. When the salon closed so abruptly, some customers thought the employees were in cahoots with the owner, especially those who bought subscriptions and gift certificates. Word got out in Tulsa's small beauty industry community that those who worked at Crown of Beauty couldn't be trusted. Audrey and Finley had a hard time finding new jobs. This story only strengthened my resolve. I had to stop Mercy before she did more damage. Not just to me, but to my son and possibly others in Waco who could be her next victims. We arrived in Tulsa around noon and went straight to the Green Lamp Cafe, where former Crown of Beauty employees were waiting for us. The establishment was located in a quiet neighborhood away from the tourist trails. It was cozy and not crowded inside, the perfect place for such a conversation. Theobald noticed Audrey and Finley sitting at a table in the far corner. He introduced me and we sat down. I scrutinized them carefully, hoping to find sincerity in their eyes, not a desire for revenge against their former boss. Audrey was a tall, slender woman with short-cropped brown hair and expressive green eyes. Her hands with long manicured fingers nervously fumbled through her napkin. Finley appeared to be a lean young man with a neat beard and an attentive gaze. He seemed calmer, but I noticed that he droomed his fingers on the table, a sign of underlying excitement. So Audrey began after we ordered coffee. Mr. Ray said you were looking for information on Mercedes Wilson. Why? I decided to be honest. These people deserve to know the truth. She married my son, I answered. Her name is Mercy Hitch. Now they live in Wacken. She works at a local beauty parlor. But now she wants to open her own salon, Mercy Magic. And to do that, she needs money. History repeats itself, Finley muttered, shaking his head. Yes, I sighed. And she chose my house as the source of that money. My son filed a lawsuit to have me declared incompetent and gain control of my estate. Audrey and Finley looked at each other, a look of understanding on their faces. Classic Mercedes scheme, Audrey said. Find a funding source, squeeze it dry, and move on. Tell me about her, I asked. How did she convince you to work at her salon? Audrey leaned back in her chair, gathering her thoughts. I worked at Curlin's Style, a nice salon in downtown Tulsa. One day, a client came in, very stylish, very confident. It was Mercedes. She asked me about my experience, my technique, my fashion vision. After the haircut, she left a generous tip and her business card. Said she was opening a high-end salon and was looking for talented stylists. A week later, we met for dinner, or dry contine. She talked about her vision of Crown of Beauty. Not just a salon, but a real temple of beauty where clients will feel like queens. She promised a salary twice as high as I was getting, a percentage of product sales, a flexible schedule, and most importantly, a share in the business after a year of work. Said she wanted to build a team of not just employees, but co-owners interested in success. Sounded too good to be true. Finley interjected. But she was so convincing. She showered the business plan, the profit calculations, the salon design. She had the answer to every question. I nodded, recognizing the description. Mercy was just as persuasive with my son. Her confidence and ambition dazzled, making me believe in her big plans. She did open a salon, Audrey continued. And at first, things were going well. Luxury renovations, expensive furniture, quality cosmetics. Clients came in, many of them came back. But after about 6 months, the problems started. What kind of problems? Theobald asked, taking notes. First payroll delays, Finley replied. A few days, then a week. Mercedes always found excuses. The bank delayed a transfer. The accountant was sick. Then there was a disruption in the supply of cosmetics. We were working with a brand called Luminina. Expensive but very good. Suddenly, the products started to run out and Mercedes replaced them with some cheap analogs. But she continued to bill customers at Lumina prices. And then she started selling subscriptions. Audrey interjected. Annual service passes at a deep discount. A lot of customers bought into the promotion, paying upfront for these devices. The money went to the salon, but for some reason not to pay our salaries or buy quality cosmetics. I even took out a loan to invest in the business. Finley grinned bitterly. Mercedes convinced me that if I became a minority partner now, I could increase my stake in a year. I believed her. Invested $20,000 all my savings and borrowed from the bank. The documents about my share were being prepared by a lawyer all the time, but they were never signed. And then came the collapse. I asked, already knowing the answer. Yes, Audrey nodded. One day we came to work and the salon was closed. There was a notice on the door about temporary technical problems. We called Mercedes, but she didn't answer. After 3 days it was clear that she had disappeared, along with the money from the season ticket sales, Finley's investment, and 2 other employees without paying our salaries for the last 2 months. We went to the police. Finley said, but they weren't particularly helpful. Technically, Mercedes hadn't broken the law. The salon was bankrupt, but the fact that she knew about it in advance and kept taking money was hard to prove. We filed a civil suit, but by then she was gone, and the company had no assets left. The story they told was horrible, but unfortunately, not surprising. I'd seen how Mercy had charmed my son, how she'd made him believe in her grand plans, and now she was using him to get me house, another source of funding for her new scam. What happened to you after the salon closed? I asked, feeling genuine sympathy for these people. It was hard, Audrey admitted. In Tulsa, all salons know each other. There were rumors that we were in cahoots with Mercedes, that we were involved in defrauding customers. Some former Crown customers were calling other salons, warning them about us. I couldn't find a job for months, had to move to Oklahoma City, start over, and I'm still paying off that loan. Finley added, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, and the dream of having my own spa is on hold. As I listened to them, my heart clenched with pain and anger. This woman had shattered their dreams, stolen their money, tarnished their reputation, and now she was going to do the same to my son and me. I want to stop her, I said firmly. Stop her from destroying more lives. But to do that, I need your help. What exactly do you want us to do? Finley asked, leaning forward. Testimony, Theobald answered in my place. In court if necessary, about what happened in Tulsa, about her modus operandi, about how she deceived people. Audrey and Finley looked at each other, their faces expressing doubt and fear. I'm not sure I want to get involved with her again, Audrey said slowly. It took me a long time to rebuild my life after Crown of Beauty. I understand, I said softly, and I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't desperate. This house is all I have left. It's where I've lived with my husband for 30 years. Where I raised my son. I can't let Mercy take it away from me using false accusations of incapacity. And your son? Finley asked. Does he know who she really is? That question hit me in the heart. I remembered Carmen the way he'd been before he'd met Mercy. Friendly, honest, caring. How he'd changed over the years, becoming rigid and calculating. Was he aware of his wife's dark past? Or was he as much a victim of her manipulations as these people? I don't know, I answered honestly, but I don't think so. My son wouldn't knowingly participate in a fraud. She must have convinced him that I was really losing my mind, that it would be better for me to move into a nursing home or a small apartment. And what will happen to him when he finds out the truth? Audrey asked quietly. It's a question I've been asking myself ever since I found out about Mercy's past. What will happen to my son when he finds out he married a cheater? That all her promises, all her plans were just a way to gain access to money? Will it destroy his life, his self-esteem, his faith in people? I don't know. I answered again, tears welling up in my throat, but I had to try to protect him and myself. There was a heavy silence in the cafe. We were each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Finley straightened up. I'll do it, he said. I'll testify in court. I'll tell everything I know about Mercedes Wilson and her methods. Audrey looked surprised by his decision. Are you sure, Finn? This could bring up the whole nightmare again. I'm sure. He nodded. We kept quiet for too long. Let her get away with it. Start over in another city. If I can prevent even one news cam, even one ruined life, I have to do it. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over Emmy. This young man who had already been hurt by Mercy was willing to stand up to her again for justice. His bravery shamed me, for I had hesitated, worried about how Mercy's exposure would affect my son. Thank you, I said, struggling to contain my emotions. I don't know how to thank you. Just stop her, Finley replied simply. Don't let her do to others what she did to us. We exchanged contacts and Theobald explained to Finley that he would need to be in Waco the day before the trial. We arranged to meet with the attorney and discuss the details of his testimony. As we were saying goodbye outside the cave, Audrey suddenly put her arm around me. Be careful, she whispered. Mercedes is dangerous. Not physically, but she's a master manipulator. When she feels threatened, she becomes ruthless. I nodded, realizing what she meant. Mercy will stop at nothing to get what she wants. And now that I was in her way, she would do anything to destroy me. The drive back to Waco passed mostly insolence. I reflected on what I had heard, on what was to come. Unanswered questions swirled in my head. Am I doing the right thing by exposing Mercy to my son and the whole town? What would happen to Carmen when he found out the truth about his wife? Would he be able to forgive me for this exposure? But the big question was simple. Did I have a choice? And the answer was equally simple. No. I had to protect myself, my home, my life. And if that meant shattering my son's illusions about his wife, so be it. As we approached Waco, my resolve only grew stronger. I would fight this battle to the end, no matter how bitter the victory. The day before the trial, I couldn't find a place to be. Finley traveled to Waco and met with Hammond Peak to prepare for the deposition. The lawyer was pleased. Having a witness who could corroborate Mercy's questionable past gave us a serious advantage. It's not direct evidence of your capacity, Hammond explained to me, but it does call into question the plaintiff's motives. If the judge sees that the plaintiff's motive is not a concern for your well-being, but a desire to seize assets to finance a dubious business scheme, it will make a big difference in his decision. I nodded, understanding the logic, but my heart was heavy. Tomorrow I was to publicly confront my own son, expose his wife as a fraud. It was a choice I never wanted to make. In the evening, I sat watching the sunset. Memories came flooding back to me. Of Fletcher, of little Carmen, of happy years spent in this house. I remember teaching my son to ride his bike on this very street. How Fletcher built him a treehouse in the garden. How we cooked Thanksgiving dinner together, laughing and goofing around in the kitchen. Where did it all go wrong? When did my loving son turn into a man capable of suing to incapacitate his own mother for money? Was it Mercy's fault alone? Or had I missed something in my parenting as well? These thoughts haunted me as I went to bed. Sleep wouldn't come, and I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow is the day of the trial. Tomorrow I would find out if I would keep my home and my independence. And tomorrow I might lose my son forever. With this bitter thought, I faced the dawn, having not slept a wink during the night. The morning of the trial was clear and cool. The autumn sun cast a golden glow on my bedroom. But I couldn't find the energy to rejoice in the good weather. Getting out of bed after a sleepless night, I felt defeat but determined. Today was to decide my fate, and the fate of the house that meant so much to me. It took me a long time too. Decide what to wear. I wanted to look put together, confident, but not too formal. I finally settled on the navy blue suit I'd bought for my student's graduation 2 years ago. I carefully styled my hair and applied light makeup. Looking in the mirror, I saw a tired but unbroken woman. A woman who was going to fight for her life. At 9 o'clock, Hammond Pete came to pick me up. He looked collected and confident, which calmed my nerves a little. "Everything's ready, Mrs. Hitch," he said, opening his door for me. "Finley's already in court waiting his turn. We've made the best possible preparations." "Thank you, Hammond," I replied, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "Whatever happens, Stode, I'm grateful for your help." He looked at me carefully. "You're worried about your son." It wasn't a question, but a statement. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "It's natural," he said softly. "But remember that you're doing it not only for yourself, but for him. Sometimes the truth, no matter how bitter, is the only way to heal." His words were wise, but they couldn't take away the pain in my heart. I stared out the window at the streets of Waco, the city that had become my home, and thought about how things would change after today. The courthouse, an imposing brick structure with white columns, seemed especially impregnable today. Hammond and I walked up the wide steps and went inside. The lobby was crowded with people, lawyers in smart suits, clerks with folders of documents, citizens waiting for their hearings. We passed through a metal detector and headed toward room number 3, where our hearing was to take place. At the hall door, I saw them, Carmen and Mercy. My son looked tense, his face pale and gaunt. He stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. Next to him, Mercy looked radiant. Her blonde hair was styled in a abrupto. Her makeup was flawless, and her bright red suit made her look like a businesswoman on the cover of a magazine. When she spotted me, a smug smile appeared on her face. I forced myself to go forward, even though my insides were clenching from the confrontation ahead. Hammond walked beside me, holding me lightly under the elbow, a supportive gesture for which I was grateful. As we approached, Carmen looked up. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw in them a strange mixture of emotions: determination, doubt, and something akin to shame. He quickly looked away without saying a word. Mercy, on the other hand, stepped forward, blocking my path. "Gwenny," she said with feigned concern in her voice, "you look great today. Finally, out of those awful old lady outfits." I wanted to walk past her, ignoring her, but she leaned closer and whispered so only I could hear. "Soon, this awful house will be a gold mine. I've already found a buyer willing to pay twice the market price for this location." Her words hit like a slap in the face. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I forced myself to stand up straight not to show how much she'd hurt me. "I'll see you in the courtroom, Mercedes," I said quietly, emphasizing her real name. There was a flicker of alarm in her eyes for a moment, but she quickly pulled herself together and laughed. "Oh, Gwenny, you are quite confused." Further proof of how much you need our help. Hammond gently tugged on my elbow, leading me away from this unpleasant scene. We entered the courtroom and took our seats. A few minutes later, Carmen, Mercy, and their attorney, a young man with a cocky expression, entered. They sat down at the table across from us. I tried not to look at them, concentrating on my hands folded in my lap. Hammond was quietly explaining the procedure of the meeting to me, but I could barely hear his words. My thoughts were whirling about the past, about the future, at the line I was about to cross. At 10 o'clock sharp, Judge Marcus Lell, an older man, with a neat grey beard and attentive eyes, entered the room. Everyone stood up and then sat down again at his sign. Case number 432. Carmen Hitch. Value Gwendolyn Hitch. That clerk announced a suit for declaration of incapacity and appointment of guardianship. The judge nodded and turned to the parties. Before the hearing begins, I would like to remind everyone present that this is a family matter and I expect a respectful tone throughout. Mr. Jenkins, are you representing the plaintiff? Counsel for Carmen has risen. Yes, Your Honor. Here's Jenkins. I represent Carmen Hitch, the defendant's son, minus. Mr. Peake. Do you represent the defendant? Hammond stood with his back straight. Yes, Your Honor. Hammond Peake, representing Gwendolyn Hitch. The judge nodded. Good. Mr. Jenkins, you may state your case. Pierce Jenkins stood up and began to speak in a clear, confident voice. Your Honor, my client has observed with deep concern the deterioration of the cognitive state of his mother, Mrs. Gwendolyn Hitch. In recent months, Mrs. Hitch, a 68-year-old woman, lives alone in a large 2-story home that has become an overwhelming burden for her. My client has repeated lotus signs of increasing forgetfulness, disorientation, and inability to make adequate decisions. I listened to these lies, feeling anger building inside. He talked about me like I was a feeble old woman, unable to take care of myself. Me, who had been independent all her life, who had raised her son alone after her husband died, who still had an active social life. My client is concerned about his mother's safety and well-being, Jenkins continued. He has noticed that she forgets to pay her bills, doesn't keep a proper eye on the house, and sometimes gets lost in familiar places. All of these are signs of a budding dementia that Mrs. Hitch refuses to acknowledge. I clenched my fists so hard. My nails dug into my palms. Hammond put his hand on mine, silently urging me to remain calm. My client is asking the court to declare his mother incompetent and appoint him legal guardian with the right to administer her estate. This will allow him to provide her with proper care, possibly in a specialized facility for the elderly, and to make a reasonable disposition of her assets, including the house she can no longer maintain. He finished his speech and sat down, throwing me a sympathetic look that struck me as the height of hypocrisy. Minus Mr. Peake, your answer, the judge said. Hammond rose, his calm confidence a contrast with Jenkins's assertiveness. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Gwendolyn Hitch, categorically denies all charges of incapacity. She is fully aware of her actions, capable of caring for herself and managing her property. Mrs. Hitch has undergone a complete physical examination by Dr. Eleanor Miles, a respected neurologist who found no evidence of dementia or other cognitive impairment. He pulled documents out of a folder. I present to the court Dr. Miles's medical report as well as testimony from Mrs. Hitch's neighbors, friends and former co-workers attesting to her capacity. In addition, we have financial documents proving that Mrs. Hitch pays all bills, taxes, and insurance. The judge accepted documents and began to review them. My client, Hammond, continued, Be evident that the real reason for this lawsuit is not concern for her well-being, but rather the plaintiff's desire to gain control of her property, specifically a home located in a valuable area of the city. I noticed Mercy tense up, her smug smile fading slightly. Moreover, Hammond paused. We have reason to believe that behind this lawsuit are the financial interests of the plaintiff's wife, Mrs. Mercy Hitch, who plans to use the proceeds from the sale of the house to finance her own business. Mercy was frowning openly now, and Carmine gave her a surprised look. "That's a serious charge, Mr. Peake," the judge observed. "Do you have evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor. We would like to call a witness who can shed light on the motives behind this lawsuit." The judge nodded. "All right, but first I'd like to hear from the parties to the case themselves. Mrs. Hitch," he turned to me. "Can you tell the court about your life? About how you handle your day-to-day affairs?" I stood up, feeling my knees trembling. But when I began to speak, my voice sounded firm. "Your Honor, I'm Gwendolyn Hitch. I'm 68 years old. I retired 2 years ago after 40 years as an elementary school teacher. I live alone in a house that belonged to my late husband and before that to his parents. I take full care of myself, cooking, cleaning, gardening. I have an active social life, participating in a book club, going to concerts, socializing with friends." I described my typical week, how I manage my finances, how I keep my house in order. The judge listened attentively, sometimes asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he thanked me and turned to Carmine. "Mr. Hitch, I'd like to hear from you. Now, tell me why you think your mother needs custody." Carmine stood up, avoiding my eyes. "Your Honor, I love my mother," he began uncertainly. "And that's why I'm worried about her. Lately, I've noticed a change in her behavior. She's become forgetful, sometimes repeating the same stories, not remembering that she's told them before. The house has become too big for her. I can see that she can't cope with the cleaning with the garden." His words sounded rote, like he was repeating what he was told to say. I looked at his face and saw a man torn by inner conflict. "I just want her to be safe," he finished, "to be taken care of properly, not left alone in a big empty house." The judge asked him several questions about specific instances of my alleged forgetfulness or inability to take care of myself. Carmen answered vaguely without specific examples. This did not escape the judge's attention. "Mrs. Hitch," he turned to Mercy, "and have you noticed any signs of cognitive decline in your mother-in-law?" Mercy straightened, her face taking on an expression of genuine concern. "Oh yes, Your Honor. Granny has become so absent-minded. One time she forgot we had an appointment. Another time she couldn't remember the name of a neighbor she'd lived on the same street with for years. And her house, it's in a terrible state. Dust everywhere. The garden neglected. It wasn't the house I remembered when I first went there. Every word she told me was a lie, skillfully mixed with half-truths. Yes, I'd forgotten the appointment because Carmine had changed the time at the last minute and hadn't warned me. Yes, I stammered when remembering my neighbor's name, because I'd had a hard day and was tired, and the house and garden were always in perfect order. Fletcher had taught me the value of cleanliness and comfort. After the parties had spoken, the judge called the witnesses. Hammond asked that Finley Taft be called. As Finley entered the courtroom, I watched Mercy's reaction carefully. At first, she looked puzzled, not recognizing him. After all, it had been a few years, and he had changed. But when the clerk announced his name, I saw the color drain from her face. She straightened, eyes widening with shock, then narrowed in a vicious squint. Finley took the oath of office and sat down in the witness seat. He looked nervous but determined. "Minus Mr. Taft," Hammond began. "Tell the court how you met Mrs. Mercy Hitch, formerly known as Mercedes Wilson." Finley took a deep breath and began his story. "I met her 3 years ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma. At the time, she called herself Mercedes Wilson and was opening a beauty salon called Crown of Beauty. I was working as a beautician at another salon when she offered me a job with a higher salary and the promise of a share in the business." He described how Mercedes convinced him to invest his savings in the salon, with the promise of golden mountains. how he took out a loan to become a partner in her business, how she hired other talented professionals, promising them high salaries and a percentage of sales. Things were going well at first. Finley cautioned. The salon was beautiful. The customers were coming in. But after a few months, the problem started. Delayed paychecks, replacing quality cosmetics with cheap equivalents. Strange financial decisions. I stared at Mercy's face. It had gone stony, her lips pressed into a thin line. Carmen looked confused, shifting his gaze from Finley to his wife and back again. And then she started selling annual passes at a steep discount. Finley told him many customers bought them by paying up front, but instead of investing that money in the salon, paying salaries or buying cosmetics, she apparently embezzled it. One day we came to work and found the salon closed. Mercedes had disappeared without paying our salaries for 2 months, without returning my investment, and without fulfilling her obligations to her clients. Hammond presented documents to the court, copies of employment contracts, bank statements showing Finley's money transfers to the salon, police reports of unpaid wages, lawsuits from defrauded customers. Mr. Taft, Hammond asked, what effect did the closing of Crown Beauty have on you and the other employees? Catastrophic, Finley answered. Honestly, I lost all my savings and I'm still paying off that loan. My professional reputation suffered. Many people in Tulsa thought we employees were in cahoots with Mercedes. I had to move to another city, start from scratch. And I know I wasn't the only one who suffered. All the employees of Crown Beauty were in a similar situation. There was complete silence in the courtroom during the story. I saw the people present at the hearing look around. In shock, Carmen sat with his head down, his shoulders slumped, and Mercy looked like she was ready to explode with rage. Carmen's attorney had tried to discredit Finley's testimony during cross-examination, insinuating that he might have had personal motives for slandering Mercy. But Finley remained calm and confident, his story coherent and supported by documentation. When Finley finished testifying, the judge called a short recess. I saw Carmen and Mercy arguing furiously in a corner of the room. Their faces tense, their gestures abrupt. The lawyer tried to calm them down, but to no avail. Hammond came up to me. Everything's going well, he said quietly. Finley's testimony made a strong impression on the judge. And your son seems to be shocked too. I nodded, feeling strangely empty. This was what I'd been seeking. The exposure of Mercy, the chance to keep my home. That victory seemed bittersweet. I could see my son's world crumbling, his family crumbling to dust. After a recess, the trial resumed. Now it was Carmine's. Attorneys turned to present the witnesses. But to my surprise, Pierce Jenkins stood up and addressed the judge. Your Honor, my client would like to make a statement. The judge, looking surprised, nodded. Please, Mr. Hitch. Carmine stood up. He looked as if he had aged 10 years in 1 hour. His face was pale, his eyes reined. Your Honor, I'd like to withdraw me suit, he said quietly, but firmly. A surprised whisper rippled through the courtroom. Mercy jumped up from her seat, her face contorted with anger. What are you doing? She hissed. We're almost there. Sit down, Mrs. Hitch, the judge said sternly. Mr. Hitch, a user of your decision. Carmen nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I was misled. Mimother is fully competent, and this lawsuit should never have been filed. The judge looked at him carefully. Do you understand that withdrawing the suit in this case means admitting that your original allegations were false? Yes, Your Honor, Carmine answered without raising his eyes. I am prepared to take responsibility for my actions. The judge turned to the parties. In light of the withdrawal of the lawsuit, I consider this case closed. Mrs. Gwendolyn Hitch is found to have full legal capacity and no restrictions are placed on her legal capacity. Case dismissed, announced Judge Lell, striking the gavel. Mrs. Gwendolyn Hitch is found to have full legal capacity, and no restrictions are placed upon her legal capacity. The plaintiff has withdrawn her claim, finding it without merit. Thank you, everyone.